Hi, welcome to Sing for Hull, week 14, day 4. My name is Mr. Crowther. I'm one of the brass teachers working for the Hull Music Service. Now, it's extra special today because we've got an opportunity to do this recording from the Albemarle Music Centre. This is our headquarters where we come to meet each other and to have meetings, and where we have all our ensembles. And as you can see, this is our building. My instrument that I'm going to introduce to you today is the tuba. This is the tuba. It's the biggest of the brass instruments. Now, I know over the past weeks you've seen nearly all the other brass instruments. This is my favourite one, of course, because I play it. Now, the thing with the tuba, we call this an endangered species.
I'm an endangered species, let me out!
Is that Charlie?
Yes, me!
Oh, hello Charlie.
Hiya!
How long have you been there?
Well, I snuck into your tuba case back in Beverley, yeah?
Now, as Charlie said, he's an endangered species like the tuba. The reason I think this is an endangered species, and let me just explain, an endangered species means that there aren't very many of them. One of the reasons is because of the size. As you can see, it is very, very big. It weighs about, I'm trying to think about this in kilograms now rather than pounds, it weighs about 15 kilograms, which isn't the easiest thing to carry around, but there are lots of other ones made that are smaller for younger people to start. Another reason why they're endangered species is because it doesn't always get to play the interesting things in the music, and I'll talk about that later on. When you look at the size of it, this is all curled up. If I was to uncurl this instrument and just stretch it out, and here is my fact of the day.
This should be exciting.
This instrument, if all stretched out, would be as tall as a giraffe.
You're having a giraffe, aren't you?
Yes, very funny, Charlie.
Hee hee!
A giraffe, although it isn't an endangered species, it's very close to being an endangered species. So I think we have a little bit of a theme going through of endangered species.
Oh yeah, like me, and you.
Yes, Charlie, thank you very much for that.
Yeah, only joking.
Anyway, let's hear a few of these notes. This, of course, is a big instrument, it's a long instrument, so it will play all the lower pitches.
Hey, my brain's exploding. So good job I got these headphones on.
I think you're right there, Charlie. So, we have, like all the other, nearly all the other brass instruments, we have valves. Most of them are 3, this one has 4. Some tubas have 5, some tubas have 6 valves because it helps to get the real low register. And I'll play something, a little scale that goes down. If you notice, my 4th valve went down for a lot of those lower notes.
It's like a bonus valve.
It can, however, play lots of nicer tunes. And in the next little section, we're going to talk about the history and maybe some of the tunes that this tuba can play.
Mega!
Hi again, so let's talk a little bit in detail about the instrument. We call it a brass instrument. Now, I think some of the other people may have explained this, but a brass instrument isn't called a brass instrument because it's made out of brass. The reason it's called a brass instrument is because of what we do into this thing called the mouthpiece. And we vibrate our lips into this. Well, it is a brass one. This is a brass one. And I used to think that that's why they called it a brass instrument, because the mouthpiece was brass. But a mouthpiece can be made of many different things. One of the very popular things a mouthpiece can be made out of these days is plastic, because some people can get allergies towards different metals and things like that, where the plastic doesn't cause any problems. Also, with clear plastic ones, it's excellent for teachers to be able to see what actually goes off inside the mouthpiece with your lips. Obviously, you can't see when it's covered in brass. Now, because we've talked a little bit about the endangered species, when an endangered species no longer is around, we call it extinct. And I have here a mouthpiece. Now, you can believe me or believe me not, but I promise you this is true. This mouthpiece, the top part, was made by a friend of mine, an excellent engineer, who bought a mammoth tusk.
I was scared.
He made this mouthpiece out of mammoth tusk. Now, if anybody's thinking that that's not allowed, it is allowed now because the animal is extinct.
Yeah, thank God for that.
And that is a mouthpiece made out of mammoth tusk. And it sounds really just the same as it does out of anything else.
Pure solid.
That's the mammoth tusk.
Hey, Mr. Crowther, one day you might be extinct.
Yeah, you're right there, Charlie. Can you look after that?
Okie dokie.
Now, let's think about the history of the tuba. The tuba is one of the newest, if not the newest, or the most modern, or the youngest of the brass family. This instrument, as we see it now, was invented in the middle of the 19th century, about 1830, to the instrument it looks like now. You've probably already seen another instrument of this family called the euphonium that Mrs. Hatton showed you. And it stands like this. And this is the tuba shape. Mrs. Hatton played the euphonium, but it's called the tenor tuba. This one is the lowest one, and I think you all know by now the word for low in music is bass. Mr. Lusvardi showed us his double bass, which is a big, big instrument. We have bass guitars.
Bass in your face and that.
And this is why we call it a bass. And I think we've seen a bassoon. Now, if you think about the first four letters of bassoon, which is one of the low woodwinds, the word is bass. So that's another low instrument. But many, many, many years ago, this was not around. They didn't have the metal to be able to do it. And the first really bass instrument was made out of wood. And it was called a serpent.
Oh, not a serpent. I hate him. I hate him.
Don't worry, Charlie. There aren't any around. It's okay. Now, we do still play there, and there's some ensembles that play on period instruments, and there are some serpents. Now, not surprisingly, a serpent is in the shape of a snake, and you'll see a photograph of it now. Now, the word ophicleide comes from two Greek words, ophis and kleis. And ophis is the Greek word for serpent, and kleis means keyed. Now, if you look at that photograph, you can see that they are keys, very much like the saxophone. And none of these instruments were very successful. I can sort of show you what an ophicleide sounds like. Now, if you're used to brass instruments, we have these water keys. And if we open all these, it lets air out. And this is a bit what an ophicleide would sound like.
The ships are coming in. I think you need to do a bit more practice, mate.
Okay, Charlie. Well, I try my best.
Oh, yeah, it is good, really.
Now, what you can hear lots of air fizzing out of it because it didn't really make a seal. And lots of composers really weren't very happy with the sound it produced.
Ditto.
So, in the 1830s, this was introduced, and it was the tuba. And since then, there have been different shapes and different sizes of tuba, some small. I'll tell you the most common ones. They are the F tuba, which is the smallest of the bass tubas. We have the E flat tuba, which this is. We have a C tuba and a B flat tuba. And the B flat tuba is usually the longest and the biggest. Often seen in brass bands. And in brass bands, you will see not just one tuba, but 4.
Overload.
That is the difference between brass bands and orchestras. Very rarely do we see more than 1, sometimes 2 in an orchestra. So that is the history of the tuba.
Great. Hey, what's that on the floor? Has someone melted your tuba?
Oh, thanks again, Charlie. I'll tell you all about it. So, this instrument on the floor, you probably can't see it, but I'll let you have a look now.
I think I heard your back go.
Here we go. This is an instrument that we actually wear. We put it on.
Like
And as
pants.
you can see, above my head is this massive big thing called the bell. Now, all brass instruments have a bell.
Cool.
And it's where all the noise comes out of course. It has a mouthpiece the same, and it has valves. This is called a sousaphone, and this was developed by John Philip Sousa. People think that he designed it for marching. Well, it wasn't really for marching initially. What he wanted was to have the bass notes, which can sometimes get lost if the notes point upwards, especially if you're playing theatres and things like that, the sound gets lost. So he wanted the sound to come forward so that everybody could hear the beautiful sounds of the bass instruments. Well, let's have a listen. This doesn't always go well, but we'll try.
Don't worry, Mr. C. Hey, I'm marching.
All right, I'll try a bit higher.
Yay! Oh, that's great.
And as you can imagine, the sound comes across quite well with that, other than the tuba that goes upwards. Of course, carrying it like this makes it a lot easier than having to carry it in front. And these instruments are probably about 10 kilograms rather than 15 kilograms, because there's an awful lot of tubing missing. It's quite simple, but great to march with. So obviously the Americans use these a great deal. Now you can still see the American armies marching with these things, but also in New Orleans, you can often see the marching bands in New Orleans, who often play, surprisingly enough, for funerals. One of the most exciting times, it seems a weird thing to say, is when somebody dies and the marching bands go along with the coffin, and you can always see one of these sousaphones. But some of the best jazz comes from the New Orleans area, and we can always see this tuba. Well, not long ago, in the 1950s, the sousaphone was absolutely a great part of the jazz band or the jazz orchestra. And one of the reasons that the tuba was used rather than a double bass was many years ago there weren't that many buildings. So a lot of it was done outside. And the double bass, if it rains or it sunshines, and it rains and it sunshines because it's made of wood, can sometimes get damaged. So they often use this instrument and these because they're made out of metal. In fact, the precursor of the sousaphone, or the one that came before the sousaphone, was called a helicon, and it spiraled round like this, but the bell pointed upwards, and they used to call it a rain catcher.
Yeah, like a
And
tree.
you can imagine why. After a good shower, it just sounded quite gurgly, and this is another reason why John Philip Sousa developed this instrument to go forward. And later on in the piece of music that we're going to play at the end of the week, we hopefully should see a very important and a very special guest player on the sousaphone.
Proper legendary.
Well, I spoke earlier about why the tuba may be an endangered species, not just because of its size, but because of the tune it gets to play. Almost every ensemble that a tuba plays in, it has a certain purpose. One of the purposes is to be really very linked in with percussion as a percussive instrument, a bit of a tuned percussion, but it does drive a great rhythm, a great pulse. It's nice though just to get a tune from time to time. Certain composers write some gorgeous tunes for tuba, and some very famous ones. Gustav Mahler
Hey, he's nuts.
wrote many symphonies, and his first symphony, he featured 3 of the endangered species at the beginning of his second movement of his first symphony. It starts off with the double bass.
Yeah.
And the tune is taken over by the bassoon.
Yeah.
And then that tune is taken over by the tuba. Now,
Yeah.
you may recognise this tune. I'm going to play it for you and see if you recognise this tune.
Oh, I love these games. Ah, beautiful.
Do you recognise that tune, Charlie? I'll give you a clue. It's a very, very famous nursery rhyme, really. Any ideas?
Oh, yeah, it's Frere Jacques, but played in a minor key.
Well done, Charlie. I'm amazed. Excellent. It was called Frere Jacques, but it was what we call in a minor key. A major key, major is happy, minor keys make it sad. And that tune goes to all the endangered species at the beginning. So that's a really good piece to listen to. Second movement of Mahler First Symphony. However, that is a bit posh. So you may not have heard it, but it's worth listening to.
Oh, it's pure sick.
There was a piece of music, and when people ask me what instrument do you play, and I say the tuba, here's the reaction I always get. Oh, tuba! Well, maybe I do look like that, and that's exactly what I sound like. But somebody wrote a piece of music with a story. Any idea who wrote this, Charlie?
Oh, James Brown, Frank Zappa. No,
No, of course, you don't know what it is yet. Sorry.
not a problem.
I'll tell you. The piece of music and the story was called Tuby the Tuber.
Oh, wasn't that George Kleislinger?
I knew you knew that, Charlie. Thanks. And this is a story of an orchestra. And all the instruments can talk. If you click on the link below, there's a good video of the story. And basically, the poor tuba only gets to play things like this.
Hey, but it's going to be umpa. Hey, told you.
And that is the sort of thing that we often hear the tuba playing. And as the story goes along, the tuba meets a very good friend, a frog. And the frog tells him that he's not that bad a person. He really is a beautiful, beautiful instrument. And towards the end, the tuba gets to play what hopefully you're going to hear a very beautiful melody. And I'll play it for you now.
Oh, please, yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a famous, lovely tune, isn't it?
And that also is played in what we call a register. It's quite high for a tuba, not in the deep. So the tuba not only can play lots of rhythmic things and low things, but can play things quite high. Have a listen to the link. So hopefully you've learned something today about the history of the tuba, or the different types of tuba and the different types of music. I'm going to finish today playing a piece of music that I quite enjoy playing, and it's called Facination with Rhythms.
Yeah, great.
It says on the music with a Latin feel. Now, it's really difficult to play something, especially that's got lots of rhythm, especially with a Latin feel, without some sort of percussion. Now, Charlie's volunteered to help me with the bongos. Are you sure you're okay with this, Charlie?
Hey, I was born ready for them congas and that.
Right, okay, I'll trust you. So Charlie's going to set off with the rhythm, and hopefully I'll just follow on. So this is the last thing you'll hear from me is Facination with rhythms from me and Charlie. Thank you.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4.
Well done, Charlie. Loved it.
Ah, well done to you. It were pure, boss. It were great and that. That were great, wasn't it? With the ophicleide and the tuba and the sousaphone and the serpentine. And, oh, it was great. But listen, this Friday gets even better because we're doing the best of singing for whole 2020. Oh, what was that? Was Mr. Crowther. So, 4 of your best songs with singing and all the instruments. Well, yeah, 130. Well, my favourite instrument was probably the helicopter. Oh, but I liked the double bass and the guitar, and oh, I can't wait. And all the singing, it's going to be great, isn't that? Oh.